skipjacks still work some of these waters. Churches outnumber stoplights. The rhythm of life follows tides, not traffic. Cross the bay to the western shore and the world changes. The land climbs into Piedmont Hills, federal suburbs, and the dense urban corridor between Baltimore and D.C. Office parks replace oyster shacks. Commuter trains replace crab boats. Same state, same water, two completely different cultures staring at each other across an estuary. This split was not created by politics or policy. It was carved by geology. During the last ice age, rivers cut deep valleys through the coastal plain. When the glaciers melted and seas rose, salt water flooded those valleys, drowning the landscape and creating a barrier that would divide Maryland's identity for the next 4 centuries. The Chesapeake is not just a bay, it is a fault line, and everything that happened in Maryland afterward runs along it. But the bay only explains the geographic split. Maryland's deeper contradictions were baked in from the very first charter. In 1632, King Charles I granted Cecil Calvert a colony designed to be 2 things at once: a profitable tobacco venture and a refuge for persecuted English Catholics. From its first day, Maryland was an experiment in mixing faith and commerce, idealism and self-interest, sharing the same piece of parchment. In 1649, the colony passed the Act Concerning Religion, promising that no person professing belief in Jesus Christ would be troubled for their faith. It is often remembered as a landmark of American religious freedom, one of the first documents in the New World to enshrine the idea that government should not punish belief. But the same law prescribed death for anyone who denied the Trinity. It protected Catholics and Protestants while excluding everyone else. And within decades, the colony's growing Protestant majority flipped the act entirely, stripping Catholics of the right to vote, hold office, and worship publicly in the very colony that had been founded as their sanctuary. The refuge consumed itself. Maryland did not just experiment with tolerance, it demonstrated exactly how fast tolerance collapses when power shifts. That pattern, an ideal and its betrayal living side by side, would repeat across the state's entire history. And it shaped more than just politics. The same charter that mixed faith and commerce also produced 2 separate economies on 2 separate landscapes. Southern Maryland and the flat eastern shore had the rich soil and the river access for tobacco plantations and the enslaved labor that came with them. Tobacco wharves lined the tidal creeks. Plantation houses rose on the bluffs. The economy looked south, toward Virginia and the Caribbean trade routes that moved raw goods to European markets. Western Maryland told a completely different story. Its Appalachian ridges and small valleys attracted German freehold farmers and communities that looked far more like Pennsylvania than Virginia. Small plots, family labor, grain crops. No plantation culture, no dependence on enslaved workers. One half of the state connected culturally and economically to the South. The other half leaned north. The Chesapeake ran between them like a seam, holding these opposites together inside a single border. By the time Baltimore grew into a major port in the early 1800s, the city itself had become a living contradiction. Its harbor shipped southern cotton to northern mills. Its warehouses stored goods bound for both worlds. Pro-Union and pro-Confederate sympathies embedded themselves in the same neighborhoods, sometimes the same families. Baltimore was not on the border between North and South. It was the border, compressed into a single city. And that city was about to catch fire. If you want to understand how geography shapes where Americans live, subscribe. Then came April 1861, and Maryland's contradictions exploded into violence. A mob in Baltimore attacked the 6th Massachusetts Regiment as Union soldiers marched between train stations on their way to defend Washington. The rail lines did not connect through the city, so troops had to walk through the streets to change stations. Baltimore's pro-Southern crowd was waiting for them. Paving stones ripped from the road became weapons. Pistol shots cracked above the shouting. By the time the soldiers fought through to Camden Station, 4 soldiers and 12 civilians lay dead on Pratt Street. The first blood of the Civil War spilled not on some distant battlefield. It spilled on a city street in a state that had not even decided which side it was on. And it forced a terrifying calculation in the White House. Look at a map, and the logic becomes obvious. Maryland wraps around Washington on three sides. If the state seceded, the nation's capital would be completely surrounded by Confederate territory, cut off from northern rail lines, telegraph wires, and supply routes. The federal government would be an island inside enemy territory. Lincoln's response was extreme and immediate. He suspended habeas corpus, imposed martial law in Baltimore, and ordered the arrest of pro-secession legislators before they could vote. Maryland would stay in the Union, not because it chose to, but because the president refused to let it leave. But here's the contradiction that makes Maryland unlike any other state. It fought for the Union while keeping human beings in bondage. Union soldiers from Maryland marched alongside enslaved people who worked Maryland farms. The state contributed troops to preserve the nation while its own laws preserved slavery. That impossible tension did not resolve until 1864, when a Unionist-driven convention wrote a new state constitution abolishing slavery, making Maryland the first border state to end slavery during the war. The vote was agonizingly close. It only passed because soldiers' absentee ballots pushed it over the line. Freedom won by the narrowest of margins, delivered in envelopes from the battlefield. And then Maryland did something no other state in America has ever done. After the war ended, instead of choosing a side, it chose both. The black and gold Calvert arms had been associated with Unionist Marylanders throughout the conflict. The red and white Crossland banner had been adopted so aggressively by Confederate sympathizers that Union authorities in Baltimore outlawed displaying it. Two symbols, two loyalties, two irreconcilable identities. Maryland took them both and quartered them together into a single flag. Officially adopted in 1904, this was not a compromise. It was a declaration. Maryland would carry both identities at once, permanently, stitched into the same piece of cloth. Today that design is everywhere. On crab mallets and beer cans,